Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Volker and here at the Halifax International Security Forum in Nova Scotia, Canada, one of the world's most important gatherings of military, diplomatic, national security, economic, and civil society leaders from around the globe. Our coverage here on this 10th anniversary of this forum is sponsored by L3 Technologies and Leonardo DRS, and we're honored to have with us Ambassador Kurt Volker, who is the Executive Director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University. Kurt, it's a pleasure.
Great.
Condolences.
Great to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the condolences.
It is Senator McCain's giant shadow has been here across this event, something that was a signature event. He participated in all of them until last year where he was unable to make it, and you and I had a conversation there at that point. Tremendously moving video. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as people watched that, and also great to see Mrs. McCain here giving the first McCain Award to the good people of Lesbos for their actions, which is something that the senator spoke often and passionately about. Talk to us a little bit about who fills this extraordinary void. We've seen a lot of great CODEL here. In some years it was very spare. It was Senator McCain and maybe two other folks, whereas this time we had 7 lawmakers here, one from the House, Mike Gallagher, making a great contribution to the event. Talk to us about who fills this extraordinary void John McCain left.
Right. Well, first off, I think it's hard to fill the void. I mean, John McCain meant so many things. He had the personal courage and the integrity forged from his time as a prisoner of war in Vietnam that made him a symbol for so many people around the world. He also, because of that, I think had a personal degree of courage and integrity that he took with him when he was speaking up on issues, whether, as you talked about earlier, about being against torture, or whether it was about saving the people in Syria from and preventing the refugee crisis that we've now seen, or any number of other issues, forthrightness in talking about Russia. So it's hard to see that one person fills that void. That said, I'd say a couple of things. One of them, he came to this conference from the beginning because he knew the importance of keeping a transatlantic, values-driven community together. And Peter MacKay was a very close partner of his in that first conference that was done here. And I think Peter, still wants to carry that vision forward. And that's one thing there. Cindy McCain was here today and yesterday, as you know. We did issue the award here. I think it's another thing. When you look at the United States Senate, there are some very good up-and-coming senators that I think share a lot of the same commitment and values that Senator McCain had. I'd point to Dan Sullivan from Alaska, a former colleague of mine who is now in the Senate, and he's now chairing IRI, very passionate of both national security issues and human rights and democracy issues. That combination is very rare, but that Senator McCain embodied. Chris Coons was here. I think he did an excellent job. Jean Shaheen was here. You have Joni Ernst from Iowa, Ben Sass as well, especially on domestic issues. So I think you've got a cadre of up-and-coming senators that are very committed to some of the same values. And then finally, when you look globally, there is a dearth of character-driven, values-driven leadership around the world, and we are facing a tide of nationalism and populism that threatens to undermine some of those core values. And it's something that in every country we need to be looking for, identifying, network, and supporting those new leaders who are going to lead us back to a path of core democratic values and core security interests as a transatlantic community. And that's partly what the McCain Institute is committed to doing.
Why Lesbos as the first recipient of this award?
A couple of reasons. One, they deserve it.
There's no doubt about that.
So the people of Lesbos, despite lack of support from the EU, minimal support from the Greek government, nonetheless took it upon themselves to save lives. And they did it as a civil society in any way they could. It was really impressive. It's the kind of human response that needs to be recognized and rewarded. Second, because it's one of those issues where you need to keep it on the radar. This refugee crisis that we're seeing in our lifetimes is the biggest ever in history. The mass migrations that are going on, the displacement of people, and it's easier for us to get complacent about that. So instead of picking a cabinet minister from some country who's done some good work, that's their job anyway, we wanted to reach out beyond that and try to find something that would symbolize the human spirit that we want to recognize and the contributions that people can make to standing up for the core values that we believe in.
There was a lot of Before I get to that, let me ask you, what were some of the key takeaways that you took away, right? I mean, you participated in the sessions, you certainly listened to the vast bulk of them. What were some of the key takeaways, the key messages from this 10th anniversary gathering?
Well, one of them, and I do point to the bipartisan Senate delegation that come, there is a core commitment to these values and to national security and transatlantic relations within the United States Senate and in the United States more broadly. So even though we are riding a wave of populism and nationalism even in the United States, I think there is a core there that remains that is very solid, and we heard that from the senators here. Another is that there is a core expert community on policy issues that understands the issues very well, that works together very well, they know each other very well. That's a bit of reassurance. On the other hand, there is a feeling even in that crowd, and this is a very like-minded, self-selecting crowd that comes to Halifax.
But bipartisan, right? I mean, you've got conservatives here as well as Democrats.
Bipartisan, conservative and liberal, Republican, Democrat. It's also multinational, covering a broad range of countries, Central Europe, Western Europe, some Russian dissidents, Ukrainians, and so forth. But at the same time, that community is worried about the direction of nationalism and populism across the broader transatlantic community. And that does point to a gap between where publics are feeling frustrated and elites need to deliver results. And that gap still feels like it's there. Maybe it's still growing even, and it's a challenge for everyone to try to pull it back together and say, how can we make sure we're delivering results based on these core values and core interests?
Let me take you to rhetoric. There was a big discussion here whether or not the American brand has been tarnished, whether the president's rhetoric is, there's a disconnect between the rhetoric and the policy. I think the Republican members in general were saying, look past the rhetoric, look at the policy, which has been very positive. But there are so many here, and privately even Republican members have said, the rhetoric is certainly not helpful. Senator McCain was passionate and thought rhetoric had an important purpose. So did Ronald Reagan. So did Barack Obama. So did Bill Clinton. So did George W. Bush. I mean, every president has used rhetoric as a very, very powerful tool to advance human rights and the U.S. belief in democracy and almost messianically preaching it, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's characterized us since our founding. How important is rhetoric, and can you disconnect rhetoric from policy effectively if you're trying to drive change all around the world at a time when these populists and nationalists and authoritarians are on the rise?
Right. Well, I think rhetoric does matter. I think words do matter. Rhetoric connects to leadership. And it's one thing to say, as many people have said here at this conference, yes, we have some negative rhetoric, but look at the policies. The policies are stronger, the policies are better, whether it's NATO deployments, whether it is pushback on Russia, support for Ukraine, engagement in Syria, stopping chemical weapons use, push on North Korea, the negotiations. I mean, you can point to a lot of great policies, but if the rhetoric is not there to identify, articulate, and promote, you're not giving those policies the leadership that they need. And especially if that rhetoric repels people, our allies. I think about Germany, where I travel frequently. We need Germany to be a strong ally of the United States. And in order to do that, we've got to communicate with them in ways that we can relate to one another. And so I think it's a huge missed opportunity to have good policies in place, to have these opportunities and not have the rhetoric and the leadership behind it.
And talk to us about what's next for the McCain Institute, because you guys got some stuff in the works.
We have all kinds of things in the works. McCain Institute has grown by leaps and bounds over the past 6.5 years. Our Next Generation Leaders program is, I think, the best in its class. We identify, train, network, equip, empower emerging leaders from around the world. We do the one-year fellowships with them and then work with them on their own action plans. We're in our 7th year of that right now. Cindy McCain has done an extraordinary job leading our efforts on combating human trafficking, and that's both sex trafficking of minors as well as forced labor in agriculture. We've gotten substantial support from that, and we've grown that program. We have field workers in Texas, and we have people on the ground in Arizona that are working with law enforcement, with prosecutors, with social services, with farms, with buyers, in order to try to root out forced labor in agriculture. And this year we brought on board Nick Rasmussen. Nick is a former National Counterterrorism Center director in the United States, and we've challenged Nick to build a program that takes a long-term view. How do we end the phenomenon of terrorism? It's not enough to whack the terrorists. We hear a lot about countering violent extremism, but how do you do it? How do you make it, again, so that humanity rejects the notion that terrorism is a phenomenon that is part of the fabric of our civilization? It shouldn't be, it doesn't belong there. Let's end terrorism.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, the Executive Director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University. Kurt, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Best of luck.
Vago, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.